Hey, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, where we are actually live for a change. I'm Joe Marcello.
Oren Phillips.
And today we have the pleasure of talking to a past guest, and I will go out on a limb and say a friend of our show, Mr. Dan Brereton.
Well, thank you. I hope I'm a friend of the show. That makes me feel good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we love talking to you. Had a chance to talk to you at Terrificon, and that was great. And we figured who better to get back on our show and attempt a live stream than you. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Have we done a live stream before?
Well, we've done so. No, us with you, we have not done so. We've attempted it in the past. It's worked sporadically.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's we're always trying to, I think, iron out the kinks. But
yeah, it looks like I just checked. It looks like it's going all right.
Is it?
Oh,
all
awesome.
right, cool.
Well, hello to everyone watching already. So
cool beans. So yeah,
all
right, cool.
So this is not like a live stream in that there's people who are interactive with what we're doing or asking questions or commenting while we're doing it.
They can if they want to, but I'm going to be completely honest with you. There's no one on right now. So
okay. So
we are.
No, it's live. It's going to run and be part of the thing.
Yeah. So, yeah. It'll record and then it'll be part of our, of our
cadre.
Yeah.
No problem.
So,
well, if you told them I was giving away artwork, I'm sure there would have been a lot of people.
We're giving away artwork.
I am giving away art on my Kickstarter, though.
True.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. All right. So we're going to go ahead and start with our line of questioning, if you will. And we're going to forego the usual how you discovered comics. So we covered that. And we're going to jump right into Femme Fatale. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so last year I did not do an art book. I had done one before called By the Blade, which I do art books not quite every year, but pretty consistently in the last, I would say, decade. I've usually got something coming on, whether it's a graphic novel collection or it's an art book. So I had, because I didn't do a book last year, but I did produce a lot of commission work and other things like that. I had so much material that I really needed to do one. So, so the first thing I try and do is come up with a concept. So the concept that I landed on after many, many, many different ideas was Phantom Fatale. And basically that sort of conjures up whatever it conjures up in your mind. But to me, it's sort of a combination of things, which is what I call pulp and pulchritude. So there's sort of like the sexy, beautiful femme fatale type characters. And then there's also, there's monsters and there's sort of pulp style characters. I don't necessarily mean like the Shadow and Doc Savage, but, I mean, a lot of what we are interested in as far as genre and the things that are going on in comics and even in movies to a certain degree, I think comes from pulp. So for me, I feel like those are part of my roots. Even though I wasn't around when those were having their heyday, I do feel a connection. So, but basically when I sat down to put this book together, another thing I found out was that I had way more material than I needed for one book. And so I have like 3 art books worth of stuff right now. And by the time I get going on the second art book, or the next one, whenever that's going to be, there's going to be even more stuff. So I don't know if that means I should start upping the page count on these things or not. But so where we're at with this one is it's going really well. It's got about, I want to say 17, 18 days left. I would like to get more books in people's hands. I'd like to have more backers. I mean, a lot of times when people run a Kickstarter, they talk about how much money it's made, but which is great. Don't get me wrong. But I really do pay attention to how many backers we have because I want to get books in people's hands. And so I can't complain. It's going really well. I'm happy to be doing it. And I'm also happy to be adding, unlocking stretch goals to add to the thing. So like we're really close to having like a full little sort of mini Nocturnals portfolio to go with it for everyone who or backs for a physical copy of the book. So we're doing these 8.5 by 11 prints of Nocturnals characters, and then it'll if and when it's fully unlocked, it'll come in like an illustrated envelope, sort of like a portfolio, and that's going to go to everybody. Whereas we also have an actual 11 by 14 art portfolio that is a companion piece. So you can opt to get that. You don't have to get it, but you can opt to get that with the book. Just like you can opt to get a sketch or a watercolor while those are still open. And I'm not sure if they're open or not, because people do drop their pledges and come back and other people come in. So it's always a good idea to check on those, because you never know when one of them might open up again and you can get right in there. So, but
I find the whole Kickstarter thing, or crowd sourcing, to be crowd surfing is something totally different.
Yes,
Crowdsourcing world to be fascinating. I remember when they first, created, or when that concept first came about, I'm like, so let me get this straight. We're just asking other people to donate money to something that they a cause or a project, and and people just show up in droves and donate money. It's pretty amazing.
I remember someone called it, before I started getting into Kickstarter, I was kind of like, I was skeptical of it for that reason. And I remember had a friend who was like, "Oh, you mean that thing where you beg for money?" I was like, "Yeah, didn't that seem weird to you?" Because someone said, "Oh, I'm going to do a Kickstarter." I was like, "What is Kickstarter?" This is like years ago. And then people who, not necessarily who had run Kickstarters, but people who had backed them were coming to me and saying, "You should do a Kickstarter." I'm like, "Well, why should I do that?" And, I thought it was like really just coming hat in hand and asking for things, but it's a give and take, and it's not quite a store, and it's not quite a pre-order, but it is kind of has become something more like that. So rather than coming to people and saying, "Hey, I would like to produce a nice little art book. Can you help me with that?" Why would you come to someone and ask them to back your project if they weren't going to share in it later somehow? And that's the thing, is like, I feel like once the crowd, the backers, have come in and they have actually funded the project, it becomes our project. Before, it was an idea with some pictures and a title, and then it had a Facebook page and a video and all that kind of stuff, but now it's real. And that is really at the heart of what I do for a living, and what I've always wanted to do since I was a kid, is to make things and disseminate them, and that's the beautiful thing about making comics, even if your comic is just an ash can, so this is really just kind of a form of that. And when you're a creator, and you're into storytelling and all that kind of thing, and you have ideas for things that you want to do, you don't always have a venue to do it, because you're kind of at the mercy of the whims of the publishing market and editors and publishers and art directors and people who may or may not want to see your stuff, may or may not want to pay for it, or can't pay for it, can't afford it, whatever it is. For whatever reason, that will block you, and it can block you. And it was blocking me for a long time. It was blocking a lot of creators. We didn't have an outlet. And it's not like when you're into telling stories, whether you're an artist, a writer, or both, you could just turn off the story faucet or the idea faucet. The ideas are always coming at you. It's part of why we have to put it down on paper. So to be able to, crowdfunding to me is like a gift, to the artist. And the fact that there are backers who are not only generous but enthusiastic enough to say, "Yes, I'm in for that," is just the coolest thing ever. It's amazing to me, and so that's why I was saying before, I'm always more focused on how many backers we have, because I want to get that thing I'm making into your hands. The thing that really makes it hard is the fulfillment part, especially when you're trying to get the stuff to people overseas, because when it's coming from the States and going overseas, it's just, the expense is really hard. And I actually didn't offer certain things to overseas backers this time, because I didn't want to deal with the issue of shipping and the expense. But a few people, I wouldn't say so many, but there were enough people that came to me and said, "Oh, wow, I wish you would at least give us the opportunity." And I thought, well, that's true. Maybe it shouldn't be up to me. Maybe it should be up to the people whether or not it's important to them enough to kind of brave those those shipping costs. And actually, so I went back and I made them available, and people still want it, and I wish I could do something, and I'm trying to do things to make it to mitigate the costs. And in the absence of being able to do that, I do add cool things to the project, enhancements or extras, things like that, which we call stretch goals. Mm-hmm. Stretch goals are also a good way to kind of get you through the quiet spots in your campaign, because when it runs for 30 days, some people think their 30 days isn't long enough, and some people think it's too long. I happen to think it's just fine. And I do have these stretch goals that kind of like, sort of wave at people and go, hey, we're still here. Maybe there's something here that now is going to be more of interest to you. Not everybody backs the first day. Sometimes people come in and they back on the back end, the tail end of things. So, and that's fine, Mm-hmm. So it was a little weird to get back into it after a year. I was a little rusty. I had to really like focus. And that was really tough to focus on finishing the campaign to get it out there. But once I started to get into it, it became easier. And now I feel like I'm back and machinery is working again like it has in the past. So yeah, it's been fun.
I want to ask a few questions about your art and your style, but I just want to say one thing about your art. Last year, I bought a few prints from you. Now, usually when I buy comic stuff or drawings, it winds up here because this area. When I show it to my kids, they're like, no, that's going in there where they play, because they love your art so much.
Wow, like, that's wild.
This has to go. Everything else, Kirby stuff, whatever, it has to stay here. Your art had to go put in there. So I'm wondering, wild. when you're coming up with art, or for this book, or just in general, what's point one? Is it just a vision in your head of what you want these characters to be doing? Is it picking the right characters for the art? Where do you begin when you're coming up with some of these sketches?
Well, one of the things that was kind of a challenge when I first started realizing I needed to put an art book out was the kind of the varied subject and genre that are encompassed by the pieces that I have done in the last couple of years. And there's superhero stuff, and there's monster stuff, and there's fantasy. And it's like, how do I encapsulate all this into one theme? Mm-hmm. And the theme for me was the hardest thing to figure out. But then once I started counting how many files I had of artwork, I thought, well, I've got way more than I need. So I don't necessarily have to encompass all this in one thing. So there was a lot of sword and sorcery stuff that was generated because of the sword and sorcery art book I did, but also there were other people coming in and asking for stuff. I thought, well, I have enough stuff here that I could do another sword and sorcery book. So I'm going to do one down the road. And I have so much superhero stuff that I can do a superhero book, but this is going to have some of that stuff. And then the other things I was talking about, monsters and supernaturals, things like that. So it was easier for me to focus and kind of narrow in on what I wanted to do. And really the artwork is there for the most part. I mean, I would say 95 to 100% of it's done before I even sit down. But then once I start working on the book, like in the next month or so, I start to get ideas for things that I want to see in that book. Like when I did By the Blade, I was dealing with a lot of sword and sorcery and fantasy characters and tropes and things like that. And I thought, got this Gandalf drawing. I want to put that in there, but I wish I had more Lord of the Rings stuff. So I sat down and I did like a Lord of the Rings type illustration. And then I thought, well, I don't have Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser in here. No one's ever asked me to do that. So I did a Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser painting, put that in there just to kind of round things out. And I wanted to do more of that, but I didn't get to do everything I wanted to do. But I did enough of it that I felt good about it. And I was happy with the finished product. So that does become a kind of, it does sort of drive where you're going to go with it. But I try and have a theme, and I try and have a title that kind of sets a mood, rather than just saying The Art of Dan Brereton, Volume 5. That doesn't set any mood for me. I don't know about you guys, but it doesn't really get me excited. You know what I mean? The theme and the concept are what get me excited. Yes, sweetheart. Sure. I can open this for you. I think I can open it. Is this Doc McStuffins?
Yeah, my name got it.
Why is it so hard to open? You're 4. Okay, there you go. You should be able to open that easy. No, I didn't. It snaps right in place. I promise. I didn't. Okay. You got to go play with it downstairs so we can talk about comic books, adult stuff like comics and superheroes.
Totally.
Doc McStuffins looms large in this house too. So
Yep, all that stuff. Gabby's what's it called, Cassidy? Gabby's Dollhouse. That's the big one right now. Gabby's Dollhouse.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So
with your art, I mean, you do the inking, you do the coloring because your art is so dynamic, correct?
well, I mean, I wanted to be, before I got into art school, when I was still pretty much in high school, I knew I wanted to do comics, but I also didn't think that I was going to be able to do what I saw happening in comics, which was penciling and inking mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And I sure as heck didn't know how they colored this stuff.
Right.
But when I discovered artists like Mobius and Bill Stout, William Stout and Frazetta and Bernie Wrightson, I could see that there were other things coming into it. I thought, okay, maybe I can do it this way. I can do the color and I can do the drawing. And then getting into art school, there was a lot of, it was just basically studying illustration. So you're doing all that, you're painting, you're drawing. And it was a perfect kind of way to slide into comics from art school into comics, is because painted comics were just starting to kind of become a thing. And there was a lot of goodwill toward doing painted comics, which did not necessarily last into the 2000s. By the time you got into 2000s, the goodwill toward painted comics was not what it was in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And so the room for painted comic book illustrators like myself and Alex Ross, take your pick, Brian Stelfreeze, a whole list of guys, the room, it shrunk. And I remember when I was working with Archie Goodwin in the mid 90s on Thrill Killer, which was a painted comic, Archie said, well, I think there's room for about 5 to 7 painted comic book artists in the industry. And he said, and you're one of them. And I was like, if Archie Goodwin says I'm one of them, then that's good. That's good news, but going out of the 90s into the 2000s, there was a regime change at DC, and I was told that first thing to go was Elseworlds, and the second thing was these guys weren't guys weren't that interested in seeing painted comics happen. And I can understand to a certain extent why, because it does look so different, and not everybody who painted comics in the 90s was a bona fide comic book artist. Does that make sense? They could paint, they could do illustration, but when it came down to the mechanics of storytelling and laying out a page and that kind of stuff, it wasn't necessarily it wasn't necessarily working all the time. And I tried really hard to make it work, even though when I got into comics, I had not taken a comic book class. So I mean, I was just going with what I'd grown up with, and trying to do the best job I could, and then meeting other people and other artists and getting, good feedback from editors and things like that, and trying to really, step on my game over the years. And I don't want to comment on what people might have thought of my storytelling acumen in the early 90s as compared to now, but I have to imagine it's better. Right. So in the 2000s, I was still doing painted stuff, but the work started to drop off. And so by the time I was into the 2005 to say 2012, I was doing a little bit of comic stuff here and there, as opposed to doing a lot before. And I was working on, I was doing cards for World of Warcraft, the Blizzard card game, and here and there. And then I started doing some Marvel stuff with this editor Warren Simons at Marvel. I did some God-sized Thor and Immortal Iron Fist, and that was kind of cool to do some Marvel work. And I wanted to do more like that. And it didn't really turn into like an ongoing monthly year-to-year thing like I had with DC in the 90s, which I do miss. But at the same time, because of that dearth of work for a painted comic book artist, you learn how to hustle, obviously, and you learn how to pitch and find the work that you need to make a living. And then Kickstarter comes along, crowdfunding comes along. And if you have an idea that people like and are on board with, you can make it happen now in a way you couldn't necessarily do it. And so there was actually a year, I think it was 2017 to 2018, where I was working on a bunch of different things, but I didn't have one comic book gig in that year from summer to summer, there was not one call for a cover, nothing. And it kind of hit me, hey, I haven't done anything in comics for it's been a year. And I at first, you don't like, that realization is not fun. But then I realized, well, I'm doing okay. I'm very busy. I don't need them. If they don't want me, I don't need them. I'm doing fine. I figured it out. I finally figured out how to be what I am and who I am and do what I want to do without having to have the approval or the desire of an editor or whatever to hire me. Mm. And the weird thing is that like not long after that, I started getting work again. I started doing covers for Dark Horse. I was doing a bunch of stuff for Valiant. Mm-hmm. And there were actually jobs that I was offered that I turned, like interior jobs, continuity jobs that I turned down for various reasons. A lot of it had to do with the fact that I was too busy to take them on, and they don't pay very well. And it's a ton of work. And there's these deadlines that can make you crazy. And I just felt like, why get back into that if I don't have to? So crowdfunding has been very freeing for me. Mm-hmm. On top of that, there's Patreon, which we can talk about too. Patreon is very similar in that regard, which is, it's a subscription service. You have people who are subscribing month to month, and they're seeing what's going on in my studio. They're seeing process galleries when I'm working on things. They see things before a lot of people see anything. And then they have the opportunity to get a piece from me. And that became a really great way for me to organize my commissions for the year and kind of set a cap on them. So there's 3 times during the year where I just do Patreon stuff. And then, so I'm juggling all these things, but it's happening in a way that I'm not feeling overworked or stressed out like I used to, in the 90s. So
just a quick follow-up with your art, because while it is dark, it's not muddled ever, and it's not, too dark. How do you balance light and dark with your artwork? Because I mean, when people see your art, they know it's your art right away because it stands out so much. It is so distinct. And how do you balance the light and the dark with your projects?
Well, I think, having studied illustration and being a fan of illustration, and painting and that kind of thing, one of the first things in art school I fell in love with was the use of color. But then when you're using a lot of color, the color has to be reined in. And one of the first things that you can use to rein in your color, other than using less color, are shadows. And so lighting was, I don't know if it was the first or second most important thing for me, but it's up there with color. So lighting, darks, lights, shadows, different values, scale from light to dark. That stuff all became very important, especially if you want to work in color for me, because the shadows support the color. So you can have something that seems dark and has a lot of black in it or a lot of shadows in it, because shadows aren't necessarily always black, but still have the color in there. And as long as the colors are working with each other, I don't get real hung up on like how bright things are. I don't have like really like, here's like I don't know if this is a good way to do this, but this is a postcard based on one of the covers to one of my art books in the Night Studio. So you have Frankenstein monster he's painting the bride. So there is a lot of color in this piece, but I'm also trying to control the colors because I'm not going green, blue, yellow, red everywhere. I'm not, it doesn't look like this.
Right.
It's not like this. You're taking some of those and you're going in different ranges. So you're keeping in like a warm range sort of thing. And then the blue is like an accent. The shadows are a support. So all that stuff kind of comes together. And to me, that's just how I like to work. I want to have good shadows in there, and I want to have color, and I want to have a light pattern and a good composition, so it all works together. And so I'm always trying to keep that balance. And I don't sit down when I'm doing and intellectualize it. It's really just like how it looks. Does it look right? Does this look right? And sometimes you don't know until you take a picture with your phone and you look at it this size, and then all the flaws are apparent. Sometimes I'm scanning a piece and I'll see the scan and go, oh, how did I miss that? So I go back and fix it on the drawing board. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of cinematic stuff that goes into picture making for comic book artists. I think if you are a movie buff, which so many of us are, obviously, and you love cinema and you love lighting and the way that even black and white stuff is lit, film noir that's the best. One of the greatest parts of film noir is the lighting. It creates the mood. That's the whole point in a way. And yes, it's dark and it's downbeat, but it doesn't always have to be. You can still take a lot of those ideas of lighting creating mood and shadow and creating feeling, the lack of light as opposed to too much light, all that kind of stuff. You can use those things to tell your story one way or the other. And I think just because of the subject matter that I like to usually dabble in, I end up in that kind of box of shadows and color. But on the other hand, when I've done superheroes, like when I did Batman Superman book in the early 90s called Legends of the World's Finest, not everything in there is dark and gloomy and shadowy. I mean, there's a lot of scenes that take place outdoors during the day. And so you have a different aesthetic for that. You still have shadows and light, but it's not as extreme. So then you start to add in other things like movement, which is really important. Like, not just the movement of the characters, but feeling like the whole story is moving, the whole world is moving. And so like, that's where things like, I started to do things like, leaves blowing through or little scattered twigs or maybe birds flying, something that creates the illusion of movement rather than just like, say a Gene Colan Daredevil, where he actually shows Daredevil going through, which I think is brilliant, by the way. But that was another way to show. That was a really great way, most dynamic way in Marvel Comics to show movement, was to show the kind of progression of a figure, which is just amazing. So those kind of things like hair blowing and capes blowing, and so that's another thing. It's another part of what I like to do is create, not have static images seem static.
Yeah, there's definitely, when you look at your work, although they are still images, you could see movement. There's life in those images, and it's fantastic. I mean, like I look at your work and I'm like, this. Every time I see it, I always picture what this could look like on the screen. If we take your style and put it in a movie, or how that would look, I think it would be absolutely bananas good, in the best possible way.
I keep trying to get their attention, and it's occasionally you get their attention and you go through the process, and it doesn't always work out. I mean, getting your stuff made into an animated film or a live action thing or even a TV show or whatever is not easy. And
No,
when you start seeing all these different properties coming up and being put into production or in development, or they actually come out, the fact that they get made is kind of a miracle in a lot of ways, because there's so many people out there who are not seeing that happen. But I went through this phase. Well, it wasn't a phase, it was years, where I'd get my hopes up because there'd be interest in something, or we'd even have an option. There'd even be money involved. And then nothing happens, it goes through development hell, and then it just burns up, and so after a while you get frustrated with that process because it doesn't bear fruit. And so I just kind of let it go. It's not that I'm not interested in it, but I don't get wound up the way I used to. I don't get the high hopes. I don't start dream casting quite so easily. And that's another thing too, is when people say, who do you see playing these characters? That's a game we play with ourselves, just like idly. You'll see an actor or do something and you go, oh, that person would be good for this character. And you just kind of don't sit there and belabor it. You don't make a chart. I think that the more that you do things like that, the more you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Wait till there's something to really think about and sink your teeth in, and in the meantime, work on other things. Work on what you're good at. And since I'm not a filmmaker, I work on what I know how to do. And if it turns out that something gets made into something, I'll be happy as can be, obviously, but if it doesn't happen, I still am very, very happy doing what I do for a living. I mean, I feel really lucky to be able to do it. And it's it's a trap you can get into if you start thinking too much about that stuff. But at the same time, I take it as a compliment what you're saying, because I do feel like a lot of what I do is informed by film and cinematic experience. I mean, even when I'm laying out pages, I like to do the widescreen as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's time to not do the widescreen, luckily, because it's not a movie, I can turn it this way. And if I want to do like a long, tall establishing shot of a building, I can do that. And no one says, "Oh, you can't do that," because of course you can do it as long as it works in the frame and on the page. You can do that, and that's what's beautiful about it. Is I can start out with limitations, and then when I need to skew it to fit the narrative, I can do that. And I really only do it when it fits the narrative. I don't try and come up with really, I mean, from looking at my stuff, I don't do these crazy layouts, because I feel like there's so much energy and so much stuff going on that I'm trying to rein in the panel, that to add that to it would just make it too much, so I try to keep it simple.
How long does it take you to do really any of these pieces that you work on? Because, like watching on the Fatale page, there's a video, and, you're there working and painting and whatnot. And it's absolutely fascinating to see that process. But clearly, there are steps involved. And,
Yeah.
It's not like, I'm going to dumb this down, but, you see Jim Lee or somebody like that banging out an image, he does the pencils and all that sort of thing. And then some other person maybe doing the color and stuff like that. Like, this is all you. And you are, painting in all the color and painstakingly doing this all yourself.
Which is why you don't see me putting stuff out every month. Or maybe even every year. It's like, that's another thing about painting comics, is it took a year to get, a 3-issue prestige miniseries done. And that's one of the great things about the European market, is an artist who's doing all that kind of stuff is given a year to do one album, which is 64 pages. And that just sounds so ideal to me. I would love to work like that. But as far as the working method, because I was trained doing, 12 painted pages a month for DC for a decade, or more than a decade, because that was my training ground. I had to learn how to be fast. And to be honest, because I was mostly using watercolor is a fast medium, or it can be. So that was very helpful to have this kind of training ground. And so, it starts with an idea and some sketches and things like that. And then because I want to work, and I want to work more realistically and more illustratively, I make sure I have the proper reference. And then I start in on composing the page, and trying to keep the pencils really simple and just the information that needs to be on there. Because when I paint, and I know that needs to be this shadow is coming here, and this is there, and that's going to be over there, and everything's composed. But you're also trying not to. I'm not trying to create this pencil piece that I'm then going to slosh color on. The color in the painting part need to be the spontaneous, energetic part of it. So to keep the energy and the spontaneity and of the pieces, you do as little pencil work as possible, and then you let the paint do its thing afterwards. You really go for it, and when it's done, it's done. You leave it alone. You move on. Although I will say, in the last few years, in doing commissions, when I had a whole slew of commissions to do, I realized that sitting down and painting them the way I was doing, fully painting them, does take longer. And I don't know how much it buys me as an artist in comics, because people in comics are used to seeing line work. So I started, I wish I had more of an example, but here's a piece that I just started, okay, that I haven't done any color with yet. Someone wanted the Horned God.
Wow.
And so this is ink brush pen, and a little bit of wash. Get in there and see the detail. So this is a drawing. This is, it's basically a drawing. But when I'm done, because it's on watercolor paper, I don't know if you can see, you can see the texture, cold press. I'll tape it down to my board and I'll start painting it in color. And because I've been doing that more often, it goes much faster. The drawing is doing a lot of the work. I don't mind doing that. I like to draw. And it's a very different way of working as opposed to something like this, which is fully painted. There's no ink line in there. It's not to say that there's no line work in there. There's just no ink line. So really it's the color and the lighting and the light pattern that's doing the work, you know, and get in there really close on her face. So that is a different way of working. Now, people like this, but people also like that. And I think that people who are really into comics can relate to the line that they see, the graphic quality of it. And then there are some people that prefer the other. No one so far has been complaining. The cover of Phantom Fatale is fully painted. If you go on the Kickstarter page and you'll see it. It's fully painted, and there's a lot of fully painted work in there. But there's also a lot of this, I guess you call it mixed medium, where it's, you know, it's painted, but it's also, there's a drawing underneath it. And as long as no one complains or says, we need you to go back to the old way you're doing it all the time and never do this, then, you know, I'm going to keep doing it. In fact, I've done a few covers that way too. I did a cover for Sean Gordon Murphy's Zorro book. I did a variant cover, and it's the same method. It's just larger, you know, watercolor, a little bit of gouache, and line work underneath it, you know. So I like working that way. It's graphic, it's fun, it's quicker. It's also tighter. And I think that's another thing too, is that comic book aficionados and people who like comic art or whatever, they want that, they like that tightness. They like to see the drawing and all that kind of thing. So I don't think it's hurting anybody.
Just want to let you know, we got someone who left a comment for you. This is Lucifer Fernandez. It said, the algorithm sometimes knows. I just stumbled into you guys live and I really like Dan's art. Since Legends of the World's Finest and Nocturnals, great pulp style. So
thank you.
There are people listening.
I'm glad. Thank you. And thank you for saying, you know, when you talk about the pulp style, for a long time in comics, for a few years, the first few years, I didn't really know where I fit in. Honey. Yeah, but you got to go downstairs and let Daddy do his thing, okay? Because I should have warned your mom. Can maybe mom or someone downstairs help you with that? I really don't know how to get it back on. I'm sorry.
The doc stuff in his
there we go.
Yep.
There you go. A lot of crying Jags at this age. So we just roll with it. Sorry.
It happens.
I'm not laughing at her. I'm I'm laughing because you have to. What are you going to do?
Well, there's not much else you do.
No one likes to hear their kids upset.
No,
of course not.
At your heartstrings, you know. And I wish I could run and help her, but anyway, honey, I just wanted you to know I'm doing the podcast for today right now, and it's live. No, it's okay. I didn't warn you, so you didn't know.
We apologize.
Yes.
Thank you, baby. It's all good.
The dollar breaking families.
What was the question? we were talking about the pulp style.
Yeah.
So I went to I was in a convention in Oregon, Portland, early 90s. And the service is still going on back there. And there was a guy who was selling pulp magazines, and I'd never seen a stand of just a bunch of pulp magazines before. And I kind of went wild. This was like a new thing. You know, I knew what they were, but I'd never seen so many of them all at once staring me in the face. And so I was like, wow, some of these are kind of priced. I could just buy some of these. I mean, I could afford to buy. So I could get Captain Satan #2, and, you know, which has a great cover, by the way. And this one and that one, all these Westerns. Oh, look at these cool Westerns. And you're seeing this great art that you would never see because it doesn't make it into an art book. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily even make it onto the internet unless you really, really know what you're looking for. And I just fell in love with it. And that's when I started to feel like a kinship with these guys, or at least wanting to have a kinship with them in a way that I didn't really necessarily feel like I had with other painted comic artists, which I do have that. You know, I mean, even though Alex Ross and I have vastly different styles, there is kinship there that we have. Ryan Stelfreeze, same thing. And lots of other artists who are not necessarily known as painted artists, like Brett Blevins, who's an amazing illustrator. whether it's doing comics or painting or animation storyboards. He's just a consummate professional and a master as far as I'm concerned. And we all hook into the pulp thing, but I never set out to be a pulp artist, but I did feel that kinship with them. And it's that's just part of the repertoire, I think, and I remember when the movie Pulp Fiction came out, or I was excited because I thought it was going to be Pulp Fiction, right? I didn't know anything about the movie. No one did when they first mentioned it. I thought, well, maybe it's a period piece. Maybe it's set in the 30s or 40s, and who knows? And so all these things came to mind of what it could be. And then it came out, and it was nothing like what I imagined. It's still great and everything. I love it, but that was exciting. But then it becomes this kind of like a buzzword, and journalists use it all the time. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think that it always fits, but it's like this catchword. It's a catch-all now. But when I'm talking about pulp, I'm talking about it's the source of all the stuff. It's the source of everything that we enjoy now. Mm-hmm. So much of it, and for me, the stuff that was the most fun obviously I'm a big fan of crime fiction, Chandler and Hammett, these guys that came straight out of the pulps, but some of the most fun stuff is when they would take these different genre and they kind of push them together into something different, like a weird tales, not quite horror, not quite science fiction, not quite crime fiction. And that to me is like the best of pulp, is when you take these things and you kind of push them together. And that's what I felt like I was doing with Nocturnals, is taking crime and horror and Lovecraft and Hammett and kind of throwing this stuff together, all the things that I liked, and Halloween, and putting them together into this, which I didn't think of it as a melting pot. It was just it was the things that were bubbling off the stew in my head, and I wanted to put them in one story and make that work. Right. And that's kind of what that's what I do when I'm left to my own devices, So thanks for that comment.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah. Hey, if anyone else is out there, please feel free to leave a comment or a question. We'd love to read it. I want to go back to your Kickstarter because, like I mentioned, I think the whole idea of Kickstarters is fascinating, but I think you see a lot of them that they set a goal for themselves and they may not necessarily reach it, or if they do, they just kind of skirt by. You powered through your goal a few times over. Did you expect it to be that successful?
Well, you hope it is. I mean, I look at the aggregate. I look at the past ones and how they've done, and I see kind of the progression. And you have to hit a certain mark to make the thing, to be able to fulfill it and pay for the printing and all the other little things that go on. So there's a number for that. Yep. And then anything above that, you're talking about enhancements and stretch goals and and also being able to make a living while you're making these things. You know what I mean? It's like people don't, Kickstarter even says, we want you to do well. We want you to make money. I mean, the Etherington brothers that do the How to Think When You Draw and How to Think When You Write stuff, they have a free blog they put up. They have millions of subscribers on their blog. And then when they do a Kickstarter, they make over $1 million and set a record. I never even heard of those guys before, but the product that they put out is quality. Even if it's just taking the stuff they've done for free and then putting together in one book, that's a valuable thing for people. And they don't offer any stretch goals. And I saw a video of one of them driving some muscle car and doing donuts in a parking lot. And I thought, okay, good for you, man. Good for you. You live in England. Now you have a muscle car. Good for you. No stretch goals for the backers. but they do free content throughout the entire year. So good for them. You know what I mean? So I just figure if I have some pieces of art that I've done that I'm not ashamed of, because sometimes you don't want to show people everything you do. Why not put them together in a book of illustrations that people, and not everybody likes art books. People would rather have comics. Mm-hmm. Trust me, I've found that people would rather have comics. But the fact that the books do as well as they do, for anybody, I mean, look at Liam Sharp's art books. They've done incredibly well. Arthur Adams, I mean, he just did his first real major art book with Flesks, and it, just I wasn't shocked at all. I mean, Arthur and Joyce were pretty surprised. Arthur was really surprised at how well it did. I have to be honest, I was not surprised at all. Why wouldn't it? People were so happy to see that. But as far as having a number in mind or having something in mind like that, when I see someone who does 200,000 or someone who does 150,000 or someone who does 70,000 or whatever it is, I think, well, it'd be great to do that, because that means maybe I could take 6 months off and finish my Nocturnals graphic novel that's sitting here painted. Well, not painted, it's all drawn, it's penciled, but I'm trying to finish painting it. And if I had that buffer, I could spend more time finishing, because that's what I really want to do. Do you know what I mean? That's the work I really want to be involved with. And so a crowdfunding thing is a way to do that. As far as being able to pinpoint what you're going to do, you never know. I mean, I don't go into it thinking that I'm going to hit any certain number. I try not to have any expectations like that. So this one, the first day, it just about almost doubled its the original funding goal in the first day. I think it was a little over 40,000 the first day, and that's never happened before.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't believe it. It just shot up, and it's not like I did a ton of pre-promotion for it before. I mean, I think a little bit, but really it was like the day before. I could have done more, and I'm trying to do what I can now without sort of belaboring it and sort of inundating people. But to be honest, I feel like the more books I can get into people's hands, the more people will be on board for the next one. And that's what I'm always hoping for. But then sometimes I'll do a book that has, like, again, I'll use By the Blade as an example, Sword and Sorcery. Sword and Sorcery book pulled a lot of people in because of what it was. They're not necessarily on board for this one. Giant Killer, when I did the Giant Killer oversized, wish I had a copy to show you somewhere. I did an oversized Giant Killer, like, what is it, 9x13 or something like that. It's like DC absolute size, right? Mm-hmm. And we even did a slipcase for it. Mm-hmm. That one, I had no idea how it was going to do, because I just, the material is 20 years old. Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't charge as much for ours as DC charges for one of theirs, and they print up way more of them. So I don't know why that is, but the fact that I was able to do that book and to do what I wanted with it, because I added 10 pages of story at the end and a bunch of new monsters, and then I had some of my friends come in and do pinups, some amazing pinups, and a bunch of stuff like that. The fact that we were able to do that was amazing, and those people don't necessarily come in for this one, because a lot of those people were into kaiju. What's great is that when I did Giant Killer for DC in '99, kaiju was not a household word. Right. You know what I mean? The only Godzilla movies that were out was Godzilla '97, which no one really cared about, and the Japanese films, which you had kind of a super nerd to get into.
Hey, let's not.
Okay. Let me just say, you're right. That's not fair to say. It's not. I cared about it. I saw it 3 times. But in the grand scheme, it has taken a back seat a few times.
Yeah, in the grand scheme, it is dog shit. I will say that. However, just being a huge Godzilla fan,
you just called it dog shit. I didn't call it dog shit.
Well, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Cared about it.
It was great until we saw the actual monster.
Yeah.
It was like Jaws.
But I bought those toys. I bought those toys though. Because I was a total kaiju head in the 90s. Helped me get through my divorce. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, my son Hunter's 30 now. He was just a toddler. We watched these Godzilla, the Heisei series, the Japanese movies that were coming out in the 90s, starting with Violante, going all the way up to Godzilla versus Destroyer, and then the Gamera films that were being done during that time. We watched all those. He was like 2 years old. He couldn't even say Godzilla. He barely.
That's awesome.
Talk. And that was kind of where I got the idea for Giant Killer, because I was watching all these and I thought, what if you had a guy who was like part monster and part human fighting these guys, but not as big as them, right. But with their powers. And that's where it all came about. And at the time, it was a new idea that DC was willing to try, and which is amazing. I'm talking about this guy, by the way. if you want some visual, Jack the Giant Killer, or Yochu as they call him.
Mhm.
The fact that it had some juice 20 years later was great. And
Yeah.
and if I had the ability to do another Giant Killer story, I would. I don't know, the cat's kind of out of the bag now for some people who've read who've seen this Giant Killer book, but in those 10 pages that I add, which are kind of like they're sort of an epilogue, but they're also a jumping off point for the characters for their next adventure. There's some of the Nocturnals characters show up in there, and I didn't tell any people that. I left it as a surprise, but 2 of the Nocturnals are in those 10 pages because I always wanted to push them together into one story. That was always an idea I had. And maybe one of these days I'll get to do that. But being able to do that book, see a graphic novel come back to life and have a second life and reach a new audience, it's just amazing, but I don't have necessarily the same people coming to me for the current one that were there for that one. I hope to get most of them. I get a good amount of them. So I wish I knew like for sure what it is that causes people to say yes to something and not to other things. So I don't really have that kind of information. There's all kinds of analytics that you can look at in Kickstarter. But it doesn't necessarily, interview people,
Right.
So
I just have one last question for you, and that is, where did you learn to draw eyes? Because the eyes of all your characters are so distinctive, so haunting. Like it sets everything. It sets the tone for everything that you do.
I don't know, but I do remember way back when I first drawing a lot, and I was 4 or 5 years old, that there was a way I would draw eyes when I was drawing monsters that I felt like the things I was drawing came to life. And in fact, when I was probably around 4 or 5, I remember taking objects like some shells, like seashells that we had, and I was drawing eyes on everything. Draw eyes on the seashells because now it looks like he has a nose and eye. And then all of a sudden, these inanimate objects started to look like they were alive, and it was because of the eyes. So I think that's a clue or the key to it is how it changed my perception of something, whether it was a drawing or an object, by having the eyes that you could relate to. And so over time, that becomes more and more, interesting to me. And I think there's certain artists who, the way that they draw eyes draws you in. There's John Buscema, Gene Colan, Frazetta. There's a whole host of, and then if you look at Bruce Timm, the way he does eyes, or a lot of animation like Disney Studios. There's a great illustrator who was Disney Studios. He was a story man who worked on Disney films for decades. Bill Peet, probably from Snow White all the way up to 101 Dalmatians or something like that. And he left Disney and became a children's book author and illustrator. And he did about, at least 40 books. A lot of people haven't heard of Bill Peet, but you should check his work out. But his way of drawing is so alive, that animation style, but also something extra to it that I just, that's something that drew me right away. When I was around 12, I wanted to be a comic strip artist. I got out of comics and I got into comic strips. So I was really into Peanuts, Garfield, Pogo. And I looked at the way that those artists drew eyes, particularly Walt Kelly. And so that also informed the way I was drawing. And I don't have like necessarily, and I guess I have some kind of guidelines when I'm drawing eyes. Like if I'm drawing a really pale eye, I don't usually put a pupil in the middle. I keep it just pale. And that gives the appearance of a really bright, pale eye without the pupil. Also, it can give it a ghostly feel too. But when I do Halloween Girl, who has dark eyes, I don't put a highlight in her eye. For some reason, there's more focus without the highlight. And it doesn't look any. If you notice, there's artists that do that. Sema will do that when he does someone with dark eyes. Does not put a highlight in there. Bolin doesn't do it. I've noticed other artists that don't. Frazetta probably doesn't do it for the most part. But that definitely, these little kind of things that I found that when I look at the eye, it feels like my eye. You know what I mean? And it's not to say that you don't break the rules sometimes, because oftentimes you do. If it calls for it. But yeah, it's just important. If I can't get them right, then the rest of the piece is crap. You know what I mean? If I can't get Silver Surfer's eyes just right, then why am I doing this? You know?
Right.
So to me, they're extremely important pieces of the puzzle.
Most definitely.
So this summer, there's a lot of cons coming up. Where will you be?
Let's see. I'm doing Wicked Con in Boston. I think that's in August.
Weird.
Is it in August?
I don't know.
I can look.
I wish that I could, but I'm talking to my phone. I can't look on my calendar, but I will be at the Wicked Con in Boston this summer. I'm not doing Terrific Con this year, maybe next year. I'll be doing the Memphis show in October. And the Memphis show is in a new venue that's like downtown Memphis now, which I'm excited about because it's closer to where the action is. And I have a feeling it's going to be better attended. I really enjoyed the first time I went 2 years ago. There's always Stockton Con in the summer. I do that. That's kind of like my hometown show, SatCon, which already happened this year. But I'm not sure about. I know I'm missing. I know I'm not doing San Diego. Not doing Terrificon. I have not been invited to Baltimore this year. Don't know that I will be. I do get asked to do shows, but I don't try and do as many. I can't do as many as I'm asked to do. I don't want to. I don't like traveling. I don't like flying. I'm not afraid of flying. I just don't like airports and all that crap you go through. It's stressful. As soon as I know I have to get on a plane, like in a day or two, I start wishing I had said no. Once I get to the show, I'm fine. You know, I'm having a great time. But even the flight home isn't so bad. It's just stopping everything you're doing, packing a bag, making sure you have all your stuff, all that stress, and then the airport, and then sitting in a plane, which is never comfortable for me. You know, that stuff is always like foremost, and then you get through it, and then you're fine. But I do look forward to going to Boston for the first time. That's going to be really cool. No Como next month for me, maybe next year, you know, but I did go last year, Lake Como. That was awesome. OAX was pretty cool. That was in Florida in January. Probably going to do another one next year. I don't know if I'll be there. I know I'm missing some other show. I can't think of what it is though. But
I just want to say that Wicked Con is August 10th, 11th. Now, if you go there, stay the week in Boston, so much thing to do. That next weekend's Terrificon, man.
You know, I thought about that. But that's away from the family for a while.
Bring them with you. Boston's got so much historical stuff going on.
I can't afford to bring everyone with me. And plus, that's asking my wife to be responsible for my 4-year-old while I'm doing my comic book artist thing, and that's not fair either. You know, Chartreuse and I used to travel the shows together when we first started dating or whatever.
Yeah.
Before our first was born, I had kids, you know, and if I was going to do show, Chartreuse would come with me. Right. And then a lot of times the kids would be watched by my parents. My kids are all adults now. Mm-hmm. And that was a blast. That was a very adventurous thing to do, you know, to visit these states we'd never been to before together and fly together. It made everything so much easier and more fun. Yeah. And she would help me at the table. But then we have kids with each other, you know, together. And, you know, a lot of that changes, you know. And that's okay.
Oh, we know.
You know what I'm talking about.
We're exhausted and tired, and
a lot of times when I get asked to do a show, I'll try and get another artist invited. Like when I went to Terrificon and for the first time in 2019, I said, "You want to bring another artist out with me, you know, and we'll even share the room if that helps with your expenses." So Chris Marinan, who hadn't really done a show. You know, former Image artist, Wonder Woman artist. Chris Marinan lives not too far away. I don't think he'd ever been out of the state before to do like a major show. And I didn't know that at the time. And I said, "What about Chris Marinan?" He goes, "Oh yeah, I know Chris's stuff. Yeah. Bring Chris." So Chris went out, he had a great time. They brought him back when they started doing the show like 2 years later, they brought him back, but not me. And I was like, "Hey." And then I went back the next year. I think it's because there was a Spider-Man year and I hadn't really done much of Spider-Man he had. But that was cool. I was really happy for him. He said, "It's the best show I've ever done," you know, and I was like, "That's great." But I had a traveling companion. Gotcha. And when I did Como, I brought my 17-year-old son, Evan, with me and that was great too, because how many 17-year-olds get to go to Lake Como, Italy, you know? let alone 57-year-olds. So, so yeah, I mean, that makes it fun, takes some of the pressure off to have someone, sort of you're doing it with them. And, so yeah, I would like to bring my family on more excursions with me and trips, but it's just logistically, it's kind of hard. Someone always has to stay in the rear with the kids and the gear, and that's not fair. So when we have, I don't know, we have a 4-year-old right now, and I'm 58. I don't know when we'll be empty nesters, but at some point, maybe when our 4-year-old is old enough to travel and be helpful rather than a hindrance, maybe we'll go do stuff with her. And then our sons will be much older and probably will be out of the house, I'm sure.
She's keeping you safe with the Doc McStuffins things, man.
Oh yeah.
Listen, I'm, I was happy to help my wife have a daughter because that's what she wanted. She said she felt a little outnumbered with 3 boys in the house, and I can understand that. And I said, well, who am I to say no? She's younger than me. She's like a couple years younger than me. So I said, okay, let's give it a try. And so we did, and we're very happy. She's our pandemic baby. She won't remember any of it. She doesn't, but she really helped us get through it. And does it make me feel younger? It does, but on the other hand, it also makes me feel a lot older because there's things that I just don't do as well that I would have done great when I was in my 20s.
Right.
So there's a little give and take there. But no, I'm happy. And if it means that it takes longer to be an empty nester, that's fine. I'm not necessarily a fan of the empty nest, and I don't know that my wife is either. We do like having our adult time, but but still, we like having a family, and we like our kids. We like our kids. Yeah. We enjoy them. We love.
I like
them.
mine too. I just like when they leave and then come back, so I have a little time away.
Yeah, there needs to be. Yeah, and I'm. It's interesting because when I'm working, they can come in and say hi if they want to, and they often will, but they kind of get that this is Dad's workspace. And I am afforded the privacy and space that I need to do my work. And that's mostly due to the fact that my wife understands, and she's very understanding. And that's a big deal, because not everybody has that relationship,
That's great.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, how old are your kids? Your guys' kids?
Yeah, Oren.
I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old.
8-year-old and a 12-year-old?
Yep.
And they like my stuff.
They love your stuff.
That is wild.
The only thing that they would put in there is your stuff. Everything else has to stay here.
So they like the fully painted stuff.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So I heard from you, but
yeah, I have 8-year-old boy and girl twins. And I have a 28-year, and I have a 28-year-old daughter. She does whatever she wants. So.
She's not at home anymore, right? She's out of the house.
Oh no, she's home.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, no, she's just doing her
thing.
she's like a roommate.
So so you don't believe that, because I don't necessarily believe this either, but my older kids all left at a certain point on their own. I never had to kick them out, and I never would have, but I'm not one of those people that feels like when your kid turns 18, it's time to turn them out of the house. And I know there are people like that. It's like they can't wait for the kid to turn 18 and say, okay, you're on your own or whatever. But if I had it, if one of I don't have any child now who's 28. My older kids are on their 30s. But if one of them needed to come home and I had the room for them, be like, yeah, sure. Why not? More the merrier. You can help out with the younger ones.
Yeah. I mean, if she, when she comes and says, hey, I'm ready to move out, as long as she has a plan and she knows, she's got all her ducks in a row.
Yeah.
More power to her. I mean, I have plans for that room. So,
yeah. I had an extra room for a little while. My son Hunter, when he was in his early 20s, he moved out. So this was about, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. He moved out because his job, he got a promotion and a transfer to the Bay Area, because we're in Sacramento and he went to the Bay Area. So he moved out, and I had this extra room. So I started putting frame movie posters up, and I had 2 spinner racks of comics, and I had, extra bed in there, and I was putting some of my Marvel magazines, and just, I was using it. It was also had TV and an exercise bike in there and stuff. So, and then also my son's king snake was in there because he didn't take him when he left, so I was taking care of the king snake. And then when Cassidy came along, that all changed. I said, "Hey Hunter, can you come get the snake?" And that's when he knew we were gonna have a baby. And then one of the spin racks is in Cassidy's closet. I occasionally go visit it, and I put some romance comics in there and some Supergirl comics. I figure if she ever opens up that door and wants to see, she'll see something she likes in there.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
So before we go, where can fans check out your work, all the socials and all that good stuff?
I have a bunch of pages on Facebook. I have like a personal page on Facebook. I've got a bunch of public pages. There's one called The Art of Dan Brereton or Dan Brereton Nocturnals, a Giant Killer page. There's a page called By the Blade, which is kind of the art book Kickstarter page. And I haven't been able to figure out how to change the title to Phantom Fatale. I did it before and I don't know how to do it now. But that's kind of the Kickstarter page. I'm on Instagram, Dan Brereton Illustrator. If you want to check out and I hope you will check out the project on Kickstarter, just go to Kickstarter and just type in the search engine Phantom Fatale. If you don't find a link like through one of my pages or something, just type in Phantom Fatale and it'll pop up, and you'll see the eyes.
That's what
You'll
stands.
see the eyes right off the bat.
Nice.
So it makes it awesome, man.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us again. It was so much fun first time around, and more so this time. So really appreciate it. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Always enjoy talking with you guys. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And Dollar Bin Bandits fans, we hope you've enjoyed this live episode. And if you're not watching it live, shame on you. However, it'll be on YouTube, so go check us out. Our next episode will be out on Friday. And until then, make sure you rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your family, anyone that you bump into on the